Right. So today we're gonna be looking into targeted immigration enforcement,
Okay.
specifically in Chicago.
All right.
And the jumping off point for this deep dive is going to be a recent CBS News article,
Okay.
and I think you'll find it pretty interesting. There's a lot packed into this article, so
Cool.
yeah.
Looking forward to it.
So the article kind of uses this visit from Acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Bowe to Chicago
Okay.
as a way to kind of look at immigration like trends across the country.
Yeah, it's interesting how they chose to focus on that as a kind of a microcosm of what's happening nationally with
Yeah.
immigration.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty insightful.
Yeah, and one of the things that they highlight is this emphasis on local law enforcement agencies working with federal agencies on immigration enforcement.
Right.
And there's this quote from Bove that says, "We're here to work with our partners."
Yeah.
But what does that even really mean? What does it mean to
Right.
work with your partners?
Well, and that's the question, right? Because it's like on the one hand, it sounds very cooperative. This idea of partnership, but we've seen in the past that that these collaborations can actually lead to a lot of tension.
Yeah.
Between what local authorities want to do and what federal authorities are pushing for.
Right.
And a great example of that is back in 2017.
Okay.
The Chicago Police Department actually refused to comply with the federal request to hold an individual in custody solely on an immigration detainer.
Right.
And this, sparked a legal battle.
Wow.
And it really highlighted how tricky it can be to balance these different responsibilities.
And, forget about legalities. Like, what about just from the human perspective?
Right.
If you were, an immigrant in Chicago, documented or not, you're going to see this and you're going to think like, oh, I can't even trust the police.
Exactly. And that's a huge issue, right? I mean, this idea of chilling the trust that a community has in law enforcement can have really serious consequences for public safety, because people are less likely to report crimes.
Right.
They're less likely to cooperate.
Yeah.
And it just creates this environment of fear, really.
Yeah. And speaking of that kind of lack of trust and fear, the article mentions sanctuary city policies.
Yeah.
It's kind of a response to that.
Right.
Remind me, what are sanctuary city policies exactly?
So sanctuary city policies, they vary from place to place, but essentially what they do is they limit the cooperation that local law enforcement will have with federal immigration enforcement.
Gotcha.
So this can involve things like refusing to hold someone in custody based just on an immigration detainer.
Right.
It can involve not sharing information about somebody's immigration status with federal authorities. And a lot of these policies, they're rooted in this idea that local resources should really be focused on local priorities.
All right.
And that immigration enforcement is really more of a federal responsibility.
Well, and it's interesting because the article mentions that Chicago is a sanctuary city.
Right.
But it doesn't really go into like specific examples of how this targeted enforcement actually works in Chicago.
Right. And that's one of the things that I think is so tricky about this whole issue is that it's often very opaque.
Yeah.
Like, what does targeted enforcement even mean?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Right. Like, it could mean increased surveillance in certain neighborhoods.
Okay.
It could mean prioritizing the apprehension of people who are deemed high risk. But then who gets to decide who's high risk?
Exactly.
What are the criteria for that? And so there's a lot of room there for bias, for potential abuse. And the article, unfortunately, doesn't
get into that.
Get into those nuances.
Yeah, so we went from talking about this seemingly simple visit from this deputy attorney general to this like web of policies and ethical considerations.
It's complicated.
Yeah, it's very complicated. But I think the main takeaway here is that this targeted immigration enforcement, it's really anything but simple.
No, it's not.
There are layers upon layers here that we have to kind of think about.
Absolutely. And it leaves us, I think, with a big question, which is how are these enforcement efforts going to reshape cities like Chicago?
Right.
Socially, economically.
In the long term.
In the long run.
Yeah.
Will they achieve what they're supposed to achieve?
Right.
Or are they going to create all these unintended consequences?
Right. A lot to think about.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thank you.
And I encourage you to, keep thinking about this issue.
Absolutely.
It's important. And, do your own research and
form your own opinions.
Form your own informed opinions about it.
Exactly.
So, thanks for listening. See you next time.
See you later.